Hello everyone, I'm Kathleen Richardson and I work on our education programs at Apple. We are so excited to join the Black Enterprise 2020 Women of Power Tech Conference today. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to connect and share our inspiration and action with each other during a time when it's needed most. Apple believes in building a future that's inclusive, equitable, and sustainable. And we recognize the urgent, intentional action required to meet these goals. That is why we are using our reach and resources to create change in the areas of education, economic equality, and criminal justice reform with programs like our $100 million Racial Equity and Justice Initiative. As a leader in Apple's Community Education Initiative, I am proud that we're expanding our partnerships with historically Black colleges and universities. After announcing 10 HBCU partners earlier this summer, we're now working with an additional 22 HBCUs, each of which will serve as a community coding center to bring coding, creativity, and critical thinking to their campuses and communities. At Apple, we're lucky to have a leader behind these initiatives who is using her influence and power to reach that more equitable, more just future. And that's Lisa Jackson, Apple's Vice President of Environment, Policy, and Social Initiatives. Lisa leads Apple's environmental initiatives, global community education programs, product accessibility efforts, corporate giving, racial equity and justice efforts, and worldwide government affairs. Before joining Apple, Lisa was President Obama's administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the first African American to be appointed to the position. Since coming to Apple, Lisa has helped us achieve many important milestones, including reaching carbon neutrality for Apple's corporate emissions and powering our global operations with 100% renewable energy. She's now the force behind Apple's 2030 goal to be net zero for our carbon emission across our entire business, products, and supply chain. So now, let's listen together to Lisa's conversation with Black Enterprise's Caroline Clarke about how she has approached her career and her hopes for the next generation of Black leaders. We hope you enjoy their conversation.
Lisa, thank you for joining us at Women of Power Tech. It's so great to see you.
Great to see you, Caroline.
You know, the last time we sat down together, you had just started at Apple. You had just left the Obama administration where you were head of the Environmental Protection Agency, obviously the first African American to hold that seat. And I know we talked about it at the time, but I don't know that you'd been in tech long enough to really have formed a strong opinion about it. I'm curious, what were your expectations transitioning into tech versus, what you found? How has the experience compared to what you anticipated it would be?
Yeah, you can never anticipate every piece of a new situation. You're going into a new system, a new place, and then a new boss coming from President Obama. But so I think expectations, what I hoped for was a place that allowed me to thrive, to lead, to grow, to continue working on my passion, which is environmental justice, environmental protection, climate change, climate justice, all those things. And I've been able to do all that and more. In fact, when we spoke 6.5 years ago, I think I had not yet taken over worldwide policy for Apple. So in the time since then, my portfolio grew. I started to work on social initiatives that are broader than the environment, which has been a real growth opportunity for me. And then I started to lead our policy efforts worldwide, which has been extraordinary. I mean, when you're Apple, we sit in meetings with the heads of countries around the world. So I could not have imagined that. It's not what I thought I was coming to do, but when the opportunity presented itself, of course, I took it, because I think influence and power, which is what this conference is about, are important moments to grab if they are in line with your values.
I think that the choice of your going to Apple was a surprising one, to a lot of people coming out of your position. I'm sure you had a wealth of opportunities to review. And I'm curious as to why the Apple choice and tech was so compelling. I think people don't often marry, right, environmental justice or the environment, period, with technology, which they might even seem a little bit at odds at times. So why was that your choice?
That's an interesting question. First off, I like to think I was a pioneer, because after I left, all of a sudden you started to see all these Obama folks running over to California. It started to get heavy over on this side of the country. I tease them, but I often saw technology as a huge opportunity. I am an engineer by training, so first and foremost was this opportunity to get back and continue to sort of build on the fact that I spent all those years of my life understanding how engineers think and how we can, engineers are trained that you are a problem solver. And so how can that problem solving be brought to the good of the world, to social initiatives, which is what I run. It's an interesting question about technology. I have always seen technology, and Apple in particular, as an opportunity to really push humankind forward. I mean, that was so much of what the company was founded around, this idea that technology empowers people. And I think we see, somewhat indirectly, exactly that in the moments around Black Lives Matter, and in the moments around the recent spate of murders, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. All of a sudden, technology enabled that moment in a very real way for young Americans, because it was on the phone in front of them. And so I'm not advocating that we continue to have just endless murders broadcast around the country, but to some degree, just like in the 60s and the civil rights movement, it's that moment of being confronted with your own racism that hopefully inspires change. And whether that's change on climate, whether that's change on environmental justice, whether it's change on accessibility for people with disabilities, all of those are opportunities for technology. And shame on us if we don't take them.
You brought up your expanding portfolio, and now we're talking about racial justice. Can you talk about the $100 million Racial Equity and Justice Initiative that you're now leading for Apple? That announcement in June, I think, it came as a big surprise and a very welcome one. But what exactly is that initiative about, and how are you going to go about leading it?
Yeah, it's our way of honoring so much of what this spring and summer has meant. Everything from the disproportionate impact of COVID on the Black community, everything from the murders of Floyd, Taylor, Aubrey, etc., unfortunately, everything from the fact that Apple has this long history in education, in making products that are used in education, and yet we all know sitting here that education is one of the huge systems of inequality in our country. We talked about all of that, and frankly, as leader of social initiatives at Apple, when I spoke to the CEO, Tim Cook, about it, he was also a product of the South like me. We know that systems of inequity are hard to change, but that Apple has a big role and a big voice. And so in June, we worked together, and then he announced the $100 million Racial Equity and Justice Initiative. And our goal there is a little bit about, it's the similar approach to what happened when I came with the environment. Meaning, Apple has lots of programs in education, in supplier responsibility and diversity. We need to up the ante on those. We need to put them on the next level, bring them, up level them. And the idea is to take what Apple does and expand it outside of our four walls to communities, first in the United States and then around the world, to challenge and change the systems of inequity. I think the most likely place you'll see that is a continuing focus on education, our HBCUs, our other minority serving institutions. But I also hope you see a huge change in the support we're giving on criminal justice, and more importantly, our supplier diversity and our spend in the Black community.
Is there a timeline attached to the initiative? Is there a goal for distributing all of that money by X time?
No, we purposely did not put a timeline on it, Caroline, because we thought that it's artificial to just, this is not, meant to be performative. We're not just putting money out so we can feel better about the situation. It's, let's think deeply about how Apple could be most influential. That's everything from policy to programming to investment in institutions and leaders in the Black community who are doing the work. And so we're taking our time. We've been embarking on a process of meeting with everyone. As you can imagine, there's lots of folks to meet with. And we're also very mindful that we're in a time where other individuals are stepping up, which is great, with resources for institutions. And so we're trying to make sure that we're funding needs that aren't met and that we're identifying places where we can be really impactful.
Is part of your personal view of this initiative around cultivating, a future workforce of diverse leaders that would then come into Apple and come into tech? Because, for an industry that, continues to sort of beat the drum of disruption and being bold, diversity continues to be, a really difficult benchmark for tech in general to cross. So how do you see this initiative impacting there?
So true, so true. Well, look, we're not successful if it's not accompanied by more Lisa Jacksons in tech, right? More leaders and, employees, colleagues in the tech world, especially in the big companies who have such an important role to play in everything from AI to social media, not Apple, but social media, an incredibly important place to ensure those don't become systems of racism as well. We need to not just address the current systems of racism, but make sure we're stopping the future ones. So I absolutely agree. I think the real opportunity here is to marry our need to just invest in education with investing in workforce development, with investing in hiring, so that there becomes a more holistic approach to technology. It's not just a race to sign people up to come in, but to make sure they're prepared when they get here, that they're really able and equipped to bring their cultural diversity to the conversation. I think too many people feel like in too many instances, I'm expected to come in and conform. And actually what we need is people to come in and speak up and bring the kind of collaboration. It doesn't mean you always win or you're always the person whose voice carries the most say, but if your voice isn't heard, then having you there can be more frustrating in some ways for people than not being here at all. So we have to do all those things together.
I wonder if you can peel back time a little bit here, because
I would love to. I'm getting gray. Yeah, do it.
You are very accustomed, you're a Black woman, chemical engineer, right? You worked in government for most of your career. You worked in spaces, pretty consistently where you were a first and an only, especially as you climbed the ladder there. And clearly you came into Apple, at about the highest level you could, right? Being the only African-American on the leadership team. But if you can just sort of think back to the earlier days of your career where you were, as you said, pioneering and then coming through, what do you say to Black women who may be already in tech or want to transition into tech about what to expect there, really from the very personal standpoint of being a Black woman in these spaces, and what does it take to sort of find your way and propel forward in spaces where you are going to be a first or an only or one of very few, and not necessarily have a sense of belonging or even being seen. That's always what we hear, right? You feel invisible, you feel discounted, you can't even gain access. So can you just talk about how that has felt to you in your career? Have you experienced those feelings? And if so, how? And then how did you get beyond them?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so much in there. And, when you said turn back the clock, I was thinking as you were speaking about all those feelings I've had across my career. I will say there's one thread, and I'm going to answer this maybe a little not chronologically, but when I think back over my career, when I think back over my career, I think of having bosses, supervisors. They weren't always the president of the United States, but even my first bosses, being fortunate enough, being lucky enough, being blessed enough to have, with almost no exceptions, bosses who were incredibly nurturing to me personally, and oftentimes as a Black woman, and oftentimes, almost never, in fact, never, were these people of color. Because we were first, especially in the environmental field. So one thing I say to young women, young men, people of color is you can do a lot of things on your own. You can put up with a lot. You can evaluate your situation. But if your evaluation leads you to believe that you do not have a supportive management structure, you probably are in the wrong place. That's a really hard thing to say and realize, but you can only, your soul, your spirit can only take so much beating up against the wall. Now, there's a caveat to that. You cannot make that determination on day one or probably even day 365. So I know it sounds cliche to say that patience and time are on your side, but it really and truly is. You may not have a boss who's supportive at first, but one of the big differences between when I entered the workforce and this very moment, and a lot of it is because of the generation who's attending this conference, is that these conversations are being had with a very different ear. I entered the workforce at a time when women, white women and Black women, all were trying to make it not too uncomfortable for men because we were the new kids on the block. We're still, especially intact, new kids on the block, but part of the conversation right now is, how dare you have made me feel like I have to conform to you? This system has to be about recognizing that I have a voice and I have a lot to contribute. So it's not something that happens overnight. You're not going to enter at entry level or second or third job as I did as vice president at Apple, a former cabinet member. I have, when you get to that point, you can sort of pick and choose a little bit. And the other thing that I think is very different is that I'm really impressed with how young people are willing to see jobs as jobs and not necessarily careers. And that's important to do, but also important to think through. You need to be, I had a teacher once who said, think deeply of simple things. There's always that F it moment, like I'm out, and that moment is really important to always have as a tool in your toolkit. I'm not staying here because this boss isn't supportive, or my worth is not being seen. My voice is not being heard, and I'm being asked to sign off on things that I just fundamentally think are wrong. Those are big moments. But that card, if you will, to take a different analogy, can't be pulled out of the deck immediately. And you need to weigh it against the experience that you are walking away from. My first 10 years in EPA, in the bowels of the EPA, were grunt level work that I use every day today because they were about how to build community and do technical work and communicate risk to people and understand the person sitting across from you and what is motivating their anger or fear. So you really have to sort of ask yourself, is it worth it? To quote Patti LaBelle, is it worth it? because walking away feels good and it might be the right decision, but you need to think deeply about that.
Did you ever do it? Did you ever yank that card out?
Yeah, I did. I mean, but not always for exactly that reason. I also, my dad had a really interesting saying, which was always leave the party when you're having the most fun. And that one is really deep. Talk about thinking deeply of simple things. And his point was, every party has that moment where you're like, this is the best party I ever went to. And then you stay and your memory of that party might be quite different because so-and-so did such and such to so-and-so. And so his point was know when you've gotten all you're going to get out of this party and go home with that in your head and all those memories and all those learnings on to the next thing. So I think that for me in my career has often been a motivator of why it's time to move to something different. That and opportunity. I mean, when the president-elect of the United States asks you to join his cabinet, you kind of need to think real deeply, not even too deeply, because it's a yes.
Well, it depends on who that president is, but yeah, I know. I hear you.
Yes.
I hear you. No, but it's funny, your comment about your dad, Susan Taylor, the former editor-in-chief at Essence, she once said in an interview to me that as Black people in particular, we tend to stay at the party too long because we're so grateful for opportunities that we haven't gotten in the past. And I think younger people today are being much more intentional. They're not looking at it as, I'm so grateful for this. It's like, I earned this. I did what it took to get here. And so, I think that slight shift in mentality makes a difference. Do you think that that's a positive thing, that sort of agility you talked about? They're looking at jobs as jobs and not necessarily careers. Do you think that sort of tech culture, or just, far and wide that works? Or does it work? Do we need to create longevity at these companies, particularly for Black women?
Oh, such a great question. Look, I think it's up to the person. I think it's up to how you feel you are progressing. I think Susan's comment is so profoundly deep. She is my soror, by the way. We were both inducted into Delta Sigma Theta at the Centennial several years ago. And let me say this. I think if you make the decision that corporate America is part of your career trajectory, you need to understand that just like any system, government in a way is the same way. It is a system. There is a bureaucracy associated with it. It is, in corporate America, your job is to, put forth the aims of that company. And since we live in capitalism, a lot of times aims are defined in terms of, profit, revenue. We don't talk that way at Apple, but you are at a company. And so the first thing is, for some people, they can't get over the idea of corporate America. If it's not for you, it's not for you. Do not try to say, well, I'm gonna go anyway, if you really don't feel the calling. Once you're there, it's about a two-way street. Are you being valued? Do you see a career path? How is your supervisor, manager, director, as you move up, those titles will get differently, mentoring you, developing you, introducing you around, giving you assignments that don't feel like, I have the same assignment I had 3 years ago kind of thing. Those are all fair questions to ask. And I really love Susan's approach because I do think as women, especially, there's still a tendency to try to collaborate our way out of every situation we might find ourselves in. And I don't want to overgeneralize, but I think it's important to make this point, and you can disagree with me if you like. One of the things I have learned to do, frustrating that I have to do it, is to really go and talk to a trusted male mentor. Sometimes that person is actually my partner, my spouse, and say, how do you read this situation? Because what's actually amazing about men in general, again, I'm generalizing, sorry, is they don't they don't feel that like loyalty gene the same way we do. Their loyalty is like, it's right here, I'm good. And so it's important to get diversity of thought around the situations you're seeing as well and weigh them all. And then at the end of the day, follow your intuition, your gut, but make a really informed decision about whether you're at the Susan point or not.
Yeah. You mentioned, male mentors and how critical they are. What do you see as the other really critical pieces? I think it's fair to say, and I'd be interested to know if you agree, that Black women in tech today or entering are still in that pioneering position because there are just still so few of us, and the turnover rate is very high. So, you've been there 7 years. What do you see as, those critical elements that Black women specifically need to be mindful of in order to successfully navigate tech spaces?
Um, the first is to remember that technology is populated by tech people, right? So you may, if you're if you're an engineer or a scientist, you already know that because you've been to school with those people your whole career. You may have, been fortunate enough to go to an HBCU or a majority Black or brown institution, in which case you still have to like get used to, white tech bro culture, which, is a shortcut for this very, there's just a belief in technology that technology can solve all problems and that therefore I am empowered to do everything. There is a very low EQ in general, and a good organization will recognize that if you have it, that's a huge asset to them. There is a culture in technology that debate and disagreement can actually be helpful. And so if you find yourself in a place where everyone else can disagree but you can't, that's a warning sign. If your disagreement is seen as a problem, that's a warning sign. But you have to learn how to disagree in a way that leads to collaboration, not take it or leave it. So it's a negotiation set of skills that you have to be able to navigate. And so what I would say is know the tech culture in terms of understand that for technology people, data is everything. Everything is like, well, how do you know that? What do you know that I don't know? Show me something. Make me believe that this is more than just an educated guess. And to me, that's a very fair question. Because as an engineer, that's kind of how I was trained. This is not about how I feel. This is what I believe. And what I believe is based on a set of facts that I've gathered throughout my life, or in the case of a project, for a specific project. That is how they think. 9 times, I had another boss like that, not in technology at all, but I learned really early on that the man thought in spreadsheets. It wasn't a bad or a good, it was that he was trained financially. And so when you learn that, first off, you learn, whoa, this is super interesting. It's a skill you can learn. I learned how he thought, and that helped me be more analytical in my thinking, more finance driven. So it's good for you. But I also realized that if I could make him understand that I was bringing some other facts to the table that didn't fit in the matrix, it was really helpful. And he was, again, really supportive.
This is a question from the audience. What are the personal, sort of assets and skill sets that you bring to this particular moment in order to be able to lead effectively? It's sort of a chaotic time, and you're really sitting squarely at the center of 2 storms right now. You've got environmental justice and climate change, and you've also got racial justice and tech equity, right? So, that's, to me, that sounds like an almost overwhelming, equation. So this question is from the audience. What do you bring to that personally to be able to effectively lead during this time?
each of us brings who we are, the product of everything we've been and who we are, to every position that we take. I am, a product of New Orleans. My environmental justice and personal passion around the environment grows from being at the mouth of the Mississippi River, drinking water that was contaminated, by plants up and down, realizing that the land that my parents worked hard to buy, the house that was destroyed in Hurricane Katrina, is not accidental, because historically the lowest land, the most flood prone land, the most wildfire prone land, all of that often goes to people who have less, and often to people, because of racism, who are people of color. So I bring all those pieces of knowledge. I bring my love for math and science. I am a geek at heart. But I think what you're trying to get at is, how do you sort of process all of what's hitting us? 2020 has been crazy on those fronts and more. And I think you have to find the well in yourself that allows you to change the things you can, to work on things one at a time, to put them into some semblance of order so you don't feel overwhelmed. For me, I am learning, this is another thing I kind of learned from watching the tech sector. I can work on, one thing I love about my job, I can work on one thing for half the day and then move on to a sticky government affairs issue, for another hour. And then on the fourth or fifth hour, I'm working on an environmental problem. I like that. And what I've learned is, okay, it's a little like, you move that piece on the chessboard and then you go and look at the next chessboard and move that a little bit forward. It feels, otherwise you just feel overwhelmed, because you're standing at the top of a hill of varying size. At the bottom of the hill, and it could be a mountain. And if you're not able to say progress is still progress, it feels really, it can feel discouraging. And we don't need you discouraged in this moment. We need you active, alert, ready to bring to bear your talents. And I'm going to make a push for in the corporate world, because if we all abandon it or walk away from it, then that's not okay either, because these, companies are going to be here. They are part of the power structure in our country. We are a capitalist country. Companies are the product of their capitalism. They have incredible influence in Washington and in state houses. So we need you here. We need you healthy. We need you, doing whatever you need to do, meditation, yoga, running, HIIT. Since pandemic, I'm become a Pilates fan, because it's that hour is for me. So all those things, I'm kind of rambling, but I just think it's so important to take what you can in that day and make the progress that you can, stay true to your values, and keep moving on.
And as you make the push for corporate in general, what do you say to Black women about why they should pursue tech careers specifically? What do we have to offer tech that tech really needs, and why should we put ourselves in sort of this position of, pioneering, right? Which is tough. It just is by nature, when you're going to be in the deep minority in a space, and the culture is not necessarily yet made for you. Why should we pursue careers in tech?
But Black women have always been pioneers. We've always been Harriet and Sojourner and Shirley Chisholm and, now Kamala. It is part of our leadership, unfortunately, has been to bring our people along, our babies along, our children, our families, to protect. I know it sounds crazy to make this all about history, but I firmly believe, and I am a feminist, that where women show up, and particularly Black women show up, we change the game if we're given a chance to. So all of my comments are make sure you're being given a chance. Do your best to put yourself in a place where you have supportive people around you, But if we're not here, I don't think the game changes in the same way. I don't think we're able to open the doors for the next generation. And as my friend Donna Brazil, my homegirl, always says, open the door and leave it open wide enough for somebody to follow behind you. That's my goal here today. And I guess the other thing I would say is, look, part of tech's problem has been the Valley and the fact that it's not diverse in general, and it's getting less diverse. Now there seems to be an opportunity opening where there's more opportunity to work from other places. And I'm really optimistic that that's going to open opportunities where part of your community will be really able to support you in your pioneering. You won't feel like you'll be less alone because you still have you have a community of support.
Well, thank you for holding that door open at Apple and across the larger sphere. It's always a pleasure, Lisa. Thanks so much for being with us at Women of Power Tech.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity. And I'm so proud of Black Enterprise and Women of Power for keeping this going, for continuing to put our voices in the middle of this conversation, more important than ever. Thank you, Caroline.
Stay safe and stay well.
You too. Thank you.